If you've been following my past 80-something episodes about various ghosts, paranormal, and mystery stories from Korea, you'd have noticed one big presence in almost all of them. Shamans. I already have a dedicated episode about Korean shamanism and shamans, and I strongly recommend you to check it out first. Links in the description and at the corner of the screen. One major difference between Korean shamans and other medium or clairvoyants in the Western culture is that shamans are not just people with spiritual power, but specifically chosen by shamanic gods as their mouthpiece. Such choice would usually manifest to those who are already born with a spiritual gift, but it could also happen to a totally random person. Becoming a shaman calls for a significant sacrifice on the person's part. As a mouthpiece, your private life would be dictated by the demands of the gods you serve, and also has to face social stigma that views you as either scary, mad, or fraudulent. If you resist the shamanic god's call, the god would punish you with the various ailments and misfortunes that sometimes spill over to your closest family and beloved ones. It's called Mudang, a shamanic illness. Many would give in the end and accept their shamanic god and destiny as a shaman, and all the physical mental illness and misfortunes that have been pestering would miraculously disappear. But some would keep fighting against the call, either by turning to the greater authority of other established religion, or with the help of other shamans, appease and persuade the god to withdraw their demand. But it doesn't succeed all the time, and sometimes the burden of the fate could instead pass on to your children. So, today I'm going to read 5 allegedly true stories about people who are chosen by shamanic gods, as told by a third person's point of view. Some are in the process of fighting against the call, while some accept the life as a shaman in the end. But certainly none of them have it easy either way. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by host, Anthony. It's not what I myself have witnessed, but practically all of the village elderlies say they saw it unfolding firsthand. It may not be the most amusing story out there, but for me it is still fascinating because the sheer number of witnesses proves its authenticity. 50 years ago in my village lived a young woman, let's call her Sujin for the sake of the story, who was an all-around regular gal until one summer night. She suddenly jumped out of bed in the middle of the night and rushed out to somewhere. Her baffled parents chased her after, but Sujin was so incredibly fast that they could barely keep up the pace. Where she headed to was the local cemetery. In the total darkness in the cemetery, her parents lost sight. Fortunately, the commotion they created alerted some neighbors and they joined the search with the torches. And when they found Sujin, she was digging up a tomb with her bare hands. Before her parents could step in, Sujin picked something up from the hall. A bell tied to a rainbow-colored threads. She smiled contentedly and fainted, still firmly holding the bell. Apparently the tomb Sujin dug up belonged to a shaman. She had no family and the tomb was long forgotten and uncared for. People talked behind that it must have been the ghost of the shaman's doing or the god the shaman used to serve, which nobody could be sure. What was certain was Sujin became a shaman, a pretty powerful one at that. A few months later, a woman visited Sujin. She, without a single word, glared at Sujin frighteningly, and Sujin too returned it with a death glare. Nobody knew who the strange woman was, but just overwhelmed by the terrifying glare match of the two women. After a long confrontation, the strange woman suddenly fell backwards, foaming from her mouth. Sujin then searched through the woman's pocket and took out a small pouch made with red and blue silk. Inside was an old coin. Sujin tied the pouch around the waist as if it had belonged to her from the beginning. When the strange woman got around, she seemed to have no recollection of what happened. She lived quite a distance away, and she didn't remember how and why she came all this way. The rumor went the woman, too, was lured to the tomb of the shaman and dug up that pouch with the old coin. Two women each took a relic from the shaman, and they had fought the battle to decide who should win and take over the complete power of the shaman. Or so people talked among themselves. Indeed, Sujin's already powerful spiritual ability got even more powerful afterwards and became a locally well-known shaman. When I was little, I and my sister used to visit our aunt every vacation and spent a week or so there. Aunt had 5 children, all about the same age as myself, so we used to have a hell of a good time together. And then, when I was 9 or 10, we visited aunts as usual, and sensed something wasn't quite the usual. Aunt used to be an atheist, and now there were a number of statues of Maria and copies of Bible here and there. And every morning, Aunt sprinkled some sort of water at each corner. Later I learned that was holy water. Aunt herself, who used to be rather chunky, clearly lost lots of weight and seemed very tired. But what does a young boy care? Maybe she found a new faith, I thought, and just spent another fun week with my cousins. But came the next vacation, my parents stopped me from visiting Aunt. They explained a god had chosen Aunt, and that was the reason she suddenly turned to Catholic faith, in a hope to fend off the shamanic god with the power of the Christian god, as I witnessed myself the previous summer. But that was all in vain. Her ailment got only worse. She could not sleep, would get mysterious bruises all over. Her husband's business took a sharp downturn at the same time, and even her children started suffering strange dreams every night. So the whole family was not in the right mind to have me around. And then a few months later, the family's misfortune reached its lowest point. While other family members were out, a robber broke in and stabbed Aunt at the back. The injury was so serious that doctors warned the family for the worst case. But Aunt eventually pulled through miraculously. So by and by it was almost 2 years later when I visited her place again. Aunt looked plump again and seemed in a very good spirit. Her house was full of other women, seemingly preparing special food for a festive occasion. One other thing I noticed was Aunt's bedroom door firmly closed, despite the muggy summer weather. I carefully peeped in, and was surprised to find a sort of a shrine in the room, a wooden shelf full of a large statue Buddha and the general. Then I was alerted by the noise from the living room. It sounded like a child's voice, but something wasn't right. I found it was my aunt, speaking in that creepy baby-like voice and acting like one too. She started nagging that she wanted the top I was wearing. I didn't know how to react. Only with other relatives' urge, I took it off and handed over. There was no way that my child-sized top would fit my chunky aunt. But It fitted her, as if it was meant for her. Later, other relatives explained me that aunt would occasionally contact the baby god she was serving and would act like a baby when she did, and that I had nothing to fear about that. By now I know that it is just a natural process of many shamans, but that was the first time that I witnessed anything like it in person. A few days later, a group of middle-aged women came to visit aunt. They all went into aunt's shrine room and I quietly peeped in. This time, aunt shouted in a low male voice and danced a weird dance, jumping up and down. Again, only later I learned that aunt was serving several different gods, including the baby and the general god, and would act out differently depending on whom she contacted with. As for the visitors, they were mothers of people who went missing on their summer trip together. By then, I was more confused than anything else of the whole situation. For the rest of my stay there, I tried to avoid aunt whenever she seemed weird again, and gradually kept more and more distance to her, just learning how she was through other relatives. Then it was when I was about 13, when aunt called us one morning out of blue. She urged that my older sister should not go to school for a few days, that she had a most ominous dream about my sister. But my family didn't care much about such, and my sister went to school as usual. And as I was preparing myself to go to school, a breaking news flashed on TV that the bridge over Han River had just collapsed. It was the bridge my sister could have taken on her commute bus. My family went mad and called up a school, police stations, and local hospitals and all. It was long before mobile phones, you know. And thank God, that morning she took the route using a different bridge. But it was enough to alert my family and be reminded of what my aunt was. Aunt worked as a professional shaman over decades and built herself a good reputation. Now she had lost lots of her power, which by the way is common for most shamans to lose their power after decades of practice, or so they say, and would just occasionally tell fortunes for her old clients. I still don't believe in shamans, fortune-telling and whatnot. I think most of them are hawks and cons. But what I witnessed of my aunt is undeniably true, and I still feel a bit of chills when I remember the moment she put on my child-sized top so naturally and without a problem. I've been working at a convenience store just over a year as a part-time, and there I met a fellow part-timer who usually took the morning shift. She was, well, for lack of better words, huge. When she stood at the counter, there wasn't enough room left for me to part through, and she had the most sharp eyes too, like that of a hawk. Since when she started to call in sick more and more. It was the owner of the store that told me what was up with her.
You see, she's trying to decide whether to answer the call from a god or exorcise it away,
he said.
And you know what? She told me that there's ghost of a middle-aged woman in the shop with a blackened face. I'm not talking about the skin color, but actually burnt black, he continued. The ghost would wander up and down the street outside the store and whisper something to kids passing by. And then the kids, without fail, would come in the store to buy snacks or ramen. The ghost lady then would watch kids on till they finished snacking and show their way out.
I didn't know what to make of this strange account, but it was definitely undeniable that the sale had indeed shot up in recent months. One day I did check out the record from the surveillance camera taken during the fellow part-timer's shift. I, of course, could not see anything like a ghost, but indeed an endless flow of kids came to buy snacks the whole time. What gave me a bit of creep was, even when she clearly wasn't paying attention, looking at her phone or something, she'd always stand up and get ready a few seconds before the next kid came in. Every single time. The counter was facing away from the door, so it definitely wasn't that she saw them coming through the window. Later, the store owner dropped more stories about her. He must have been pretty bored. Her grandmother refused to accept God's call and ended up being killed at an accident. Her mother tried to avoid the same destiny but fell ill and ended up dying young too. Doctors found out she apparently died of malnutrition of all things. She herself didn't eat particularly much and did all she could do to control her weight, but would only get bigger and bigger since she got the call from the god. Then the store owner added that he suspected the ghost with a black face should be his late mother. He lost his mother young and grew up under mean stepmother, and his mother died in fire. While his father was at work and he himself was at a cram school, a fire broke out in the family home and his mother alone burned to death. Her body was so charred they didn't recognize it was a body at first when they found her. When she was alive, the owner was her favorite. It must have been heartbreaking to die leaving such a beloved child behind and subsequently to see him maltreated by his stepmother. And now the spirit of her seemed to be still lingering around and try her best to help her now a grown-up son. As for the fellow part-timer girl, she eventually quitted the job citing her health getting worse. And I don't know what she eventually decided to do about her future. When I was young, the boy next door was my bestie. Let's call him Jinsu. His mother seemed always unwell. She was tall but bent and looked almost gaunt with high cheekbones. I and Jinsu were always together, and when I visited his place, Jinsu's mom would make us ramen, which was always tasteless. But well, Jinsu often invited me around, and I invariably ended up swallowing down the bland ramen. One summer, Jinsu said they were going on a holiday and left his pet hamsters with me. I knew them well already and liked animals, so I gladly agreed to take care of them. Jinsu came back almost a month later, and I once again visited his place and was shocked. First, his mother, who'd always been sickly and pale, turned suddenly fit, almost burly in that 1 month. And second, her room was adorned with golden statue Buddha, scarily colorful mural, and burning candles. Things I only saw on TV. I passed on to my mom that something had happened to our neighbor. Mom simply mentioned that she had become a shaman now, and didn't mention anything further, or didn't seem to want to talk about it anymore. Jinsu's place became busy. It was always full of strange people and always something was going on. I stopped visiting there. Too crowded now to play there anymore, I said. But I think the true reason was I was scared of the whole situation and his mother. We eventually drifted apart, But it didn't stop all sorts of scary noises from his place seeping over the fence. Strange voices and moans that sometimes sounded like a baby and sometimes of an old hag, and the thick smell of burning incense, which I cannot forget even after 20 years. One evening I was playing by myself at the fence to Jinsu's place and heard Jinsu's mother talking on the other side in a strange monotoned voice. "I don't care about myself, but please, please, please spare Jinsu, please spare my son." And before I could make sense of it, she screeched, "Stop eavesdropping!" About 3 months later, we moved to a different place. It was quite sudden, but at least into a new apartment, and I soon forgot all about Jinsu and his mom. Years later, I happened to visit my old town. I felt instantly nostalgic. The old bakery was still there, and the corner shop too. But when I reached my old family home, it wasn't there anymore. In fact, both my old house and Jinsu's were gone, and was a church now on the plot. I don't know why, but suddenly remembered what I overheard of Jinsu's mom all those years ago. Another neighbor passing by happened to recognize me, and through her, I could learn what happened to Jinsu's family. That fire broke out, and both Jinsu and his mother were killed in the fire. And only later I learned the reason my family moved away so suddenly. Apparently, Jinsu's mom warned us that we too could meet the same fate had we stayed. I'm deaf. I wasn't born deaf, but gradually lost hearing, and by now can't hear anything without a hearing aid. I'm probably using my condition as an excuse, but I am unsocial. Lost contacts with most of friends over the years and moved out from family home too to avoid seeing my mom sigh whenever she catches a sight of me. Other than hearing, I'm all around a normal guy of 28. Graduated uni, but nobody seems to want to hire a deaf guy. People say when one loses one sense, other senses get sharper in compensation. As for me, I think my sixth sense has got indeed sharper. Funnily enough, I hear the presence, like a distant rumble. Anyway, my story took place a couple of months ago. As you can expect, I spend most of time on the internet. I was introduced to video chatting through some friends and started spending quite some time there when idle. For me, meeting people that way was much easier, and there I got acquainted with a girl. She was pretty, and I didn't mind her calling me Oppa. It was midsummer, and I must admit I also didn't mind seeing her in a skimpy tank tops. The thing was, she got gradually more suggestive. Sometimes she would dance in front of the camera. Other times she asked me if I thought her boobs got bigger. I honestly didn't mind and just played along. The first thing I noticed was my pet cat would glare with her tail up stiff whenever this girl showed up on my screen. They say cats have spiritual sense. Maybe I should have paid more attention then already. One day this girl asked me to meet her on the chat at 3 in the morning, that she had something she'd like to show me and didn't want to be interrupted by her mom. Well, why not? When I showed up at 3, she insisted that we should voice chat at the same time. I usually don't wear the hearing aid home. I didn't want to reveal to her that I am deaf, so I refused a few times. And her expression turned cold. In the end, I turned on the mic and speakers, thinking that I could just make up reactions to whatever she should say. Next thing she suggested was that we both should get naked. But I sensed something wasn't quite right. When I refused, saying I was too shy, her eyes rolled backwards, and she started yelling in a strange voice, like that of a shaman when she contacted a spirit, that I should get undressed right now. I creeped out, but that was nothing comparing to the shock I felt when I realized I wasn't wearing my hearing aid, and I shouldn't be hearing her voice at all. I jumped up from my chair and pulled out the cables to the speakers, but the voice was still ringing in my ears, clearer than it would have with a hearing aid.
Take off your clothes off! Come on, quick!
I realized it was something beyond normal. As I told you, as I got deaf, my paranormal hearing got sharper, and her husky voice and laughter ringing in my ears were definitely beyond this world. I logged off and even pulled out the internet line. Now she started texting to my phone. "Why are you gone? I'm sorry, come back," and so on. And when I ignored them, she swore at me in one text and declared her love for me in the next. It was really manic. I turned off my phone and avoided the internet for good 2 days. I initially worried if she wouldn't find out where I lived and knock on my door, but no. There was no more messages when I turned on the phone either. Phew, that was a crazy episode, but now all over. Or so I thought. A week or so later, a friend happened to ask me to accompany him to a shaman to have his fortune told. And as soon as I walked in, the shaman shouted at me,
How come a man is carrying such a strong yin energy about you?
She then asked if there wasn't some incident with a woman recently. Could it be? I thought, and told her what happened on the chat. And this is what she explained. As you know, one becomes a shaman because he or she is chosen by a god. But if one would rather die than accept a fate, one could try to appease the god to let go. It's a risky and difficult process, and no shaman would take up such a task lightly. But when the god involved is a spirit of a maiden ghost, that's a different story. One could apparently rid of the spirit by luring an unsuspecting man sexually. As the relationship gets more intimate, the maiden spirit attaches to the man's spirit more and more, and that way the chosen person can get away from the fate, while the poor man becomes the victim, either destined to become a shaman himself or die in a year's time. And that must have been what the girl was trying to do on me. It goes without saying I stopped visiting the chatting site. I can't tell you what her chat nickname was, but I'd just say, if a cute girl with a bob cut hair with a heavy makeup on first suggests you something indecent, run. Run for your life. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. I guess some of you might wonder how in the spanking modern country like South Korea could such archaic stuff as shaman be still present? In everyday life, shamans are certainly not so present actually, despite all the stories featuring them. In fact, I myself have never visited or even met one so far. So I'm certainly not in the position to claim whether shamanism and its concepts are true or not. I'm just, as a storyteller, explaining them as usually perceived in Korean culture. One thing I can definitely say, though, is shamanism forms the basis of the traditional spiritual worldview of Korea. It is such an undogmatic and flexible belief system, and whenever a more established and influential religions arrive the land, be it Taoism, Buddhism, or even Christianity, shamanism have embraced and observed their elements in their outline of their worldview rather than fight it against them. It's certainly the secret of its longevity. What's your impression of Korean shamanism and shamans so far? Do let me know in the comment. If you enjoyed my work, why not give it a like and comment, and please consider subscribing to my channel. It's free, and that way you won't miss my weekly uploads of amusing stories fresh from Korea. I'll come back next Sunday. Stay safe and take care.